What's good with the YouTube of Comics Perspective? As you already know, it's Big Flacco coming through, sliding through, smashing through with my co-host, Big Senor Rojo. With a little bit of energy. Anyways, just a little bit. Anyways, man, we found an interesting article, as you can tell by the title. We've discussed it in different past content videos about S.N.Y, GP, the differences, and how our perspective of how they were created. And so we found an interesting article that talks about the creation of the first S.N.Y yards, and where S.N.Y started with 1,000 inmates in the beginning back in 1998 to where it's evolved into today. Excuse me. You catch me on that right now?
Yeah, I got you.
I'm gonna let Ro get to it on the video, man.
All right, man. This article is from the LA Times by Sam Quinones. And man, it's all the way back from 05, man. So this is like right when that stuff was really getting cracking, you know, the beginning of Mule Creek and so on and so on. Here we go. Once upon a time, had they met on a prison yard, inmates Emilio Soto and Gerardo Fuentes might have sliced each other to pieces. Soto was a gang member from Stockton. Fuentes one from Los Angeles. Any little look that I thought was disrespectful, or he thought was disrespectful, Fuentes says, and it would have been on. For almost 40 years, Latino gangs from both Northern and Southern California have been at war. The feud has cost hundreds of lives inside and outside of prison, dictated prison budgets, and forced authorities to separate gangs from one another. Today, though, Soto and Fuentes live in peace, side by side, on the top tier cell block C4 at the state prison in Lancaster. They are part of a revolution in protective custody that is slowly breaking the stranglehold of gang-imposed rules on state prison life. Until now, protective custody has been for prison's pariahs, sex offenders, informants, those guys who like guys with the same equipment, who were locked in their cells most of the day. Gang members and other inmates viewed this as an unmanly and arduous way to do time. But in the last few years, California prisons have given inmates another choice by converting entire yards to protective custody. The result, thousands of ex-gang members serving time for murder, robbery, and assault have defected to these so-called sensitive needs yards, S.N.Ys, seeking a haven from gang life. As on regular prison yards, S.N.Y inmates live two to a cell and have the same exercise and meal routines. The only difference is that they live with other inmates whose lives, like theirs, would be in danger if they were in the general population mix. Demand for S.N.Y space is growing unrelentingly. Since 1998, when the practice of setting aside whole yards for protective custody began, the S.N.Y population has grown from less than 1,000 to more than 13,000. And remember, this is in 2005. Almost 9% of adult male inmates, by far the largest protective custody population in state history.
So Ro, I don't mean to interrupt you, right? But something's on my mind. So all these years in prison, from like the 50s on back, there was never an established protective custody yard till 1998.
Yeah, people, even when I first came to the pen in 93, people would, if they were PCs or whatever the case might be, they'd either try to blend in somewhere, you know, or they would just be stuck in ADSEG in the hole or in the shoe. Nowhere to go.
It would be common, right? This is what I remember. Like Solano was a stronghold for us there was an ex-MA member on that yard. He was an MA dropout. But because it was a stronghold for us, there was no influential Southsiders on that yard, and he was no threat. We allowed him to be on the yard because he was a dropout. We didn't care. We didn't look into his past or what he was. He was buying content off us all the time. You know what I mean? So I get that. Back then, if you were a profile dropout at that time, sometimes they would try to run other. I mean, there was guys that came back that had OB numbers that came back with different numbers, and they used to run other, or they say they were Native American. That was a common theme back then. But so back then, there really wasn't any. There was yards that were known to be soft, like CMC East was always known to be a little bit soft, but they had actives there too as well. I went there, only there for 4 hours though. Mill Creek, they had one yard that was pretty soft back in the days, and you know, but this is where the establishment of the S.N.Y. yards goes from here, man. So 1998, I just had to bring that up while it was fresh on the mind.
Yeah, no doubt. Inmates requesting sensitive needs yards must explain why they need protective custody, and their claims are investigated by prison staff. Prison reception centers in Chino, Delano, and Wasco reported a combined 1,400 new inmates awaiting S.N.Y. assignments. We are asking people to step forward and renounce gangs, says Joe McGrath, Deputy Director of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. You can't legitimately ask them to do that if you can't guarantee a better quality of life. This year, this is 2005, Mule Creek State Prison in Ione became the first all S.N.Y. institution. 3 of the 4 yards at the prison in Lancaster are for S.N.Y. and honor inmates. Pleasant Valley State Prison in Coalinga is half S.N.Y. Corcoran State Prison and Kern Valley State Prison in Delano will convert yards to S.N.Y.s by year's end, officials say. Meanwhile, so many gang members with heavy reputations are opting into the yards that protective custody is no longer in tune with being a punk, said David Delgadillo, a former longtime member of the Mexican Mafia on a sensitive needs yard at Pleasant Valley, serving time for murder and attempted murder. Now it's becoming common for people to drop out, he says. Some S.N.Y. inmates have a change of heart. Some have refused to kill a friend on gang orders. Many are simply tired. Rudy Martinez, a Mexican Mafia associate serving time for murder, realized he'd had enough while being bussed out of Pelican Bay Prison in Crescent City a few years ago. He saw people jogging, driving, entering restaurants. At one clogged intersection, a motorist pounded on the dashboard yelling at traffic. She was so frustrated, but I wanted to trade places with her right then and there. He left the Mexican Mafia for S.N.Y. shortly thereafter, hoping for parole someday. Others' motives in asking for S.N.Y. placements are less pure. They've run up prison drug or gambling debts they can't pay. Some plan to go back to gang life once freed. Nevertheless, for the first time on California prison yards, large numbers of Northern and Southern California Latinos, blacks and whites, Bloods and Crips, Nazi lowriders, and Aryan Brotherhood members all live together. All of them coexist with people who like the same equipment, SEX offenders, former police officers, and informants. Though they don't keep statistics or cost estimates by yard, prison officials say fights, stabbings, and riots are less common on S.N.Y., making them safer and less expensive to operate. You still have fights, but they're nowhere near what's generated on active gang yards, said Lieutenant Ken Lewis, Lancaster State Prison spokesman. Anytime you have a minimum amount of violence on a yard, obviously it's cost effective. Still, much is unknown about the effects of S.N.Ys. No one has studied recidivism among parolees from the yards, for example, or whether S.N.Y. inmates might make better use of classes, jobs, and self-help groups than those on gang-dominated yards. For now, no greater resources are devoted to rehabilitations on S.N.Y. than anywhere else. It's an innovation whose consequences aren't known and have yet to be studied, said Valerie Jenis, a criminologist at UC Irvine. This year, though, the state prison system adopted inmate rehabilitation as a goal, and the U.S. Supreme Court ordered racial integration in California prisons. S.N.Ys are among the few places where gang rules and violence don't get in the way. By 26, Emilio Soto was such a dedicated member of the Nuestra Familia, the prison gang of Northern California Latinos, that he had threatened to kill his own brother if he spoke against the organization. But when Soto was in Pelican Bay, he said, a gang leader spread false rumors that he turned informant. Based on that, Soto said Nuestra Familia members tried to kill him. Even so, for 5 years, Soto refused protective custody, risking stabbings every day. Finally, he got tired of the gang life and entered S.N.Y. at another prison in 1999. He was so ashamed that he didn't speak to his family for 3 years. In gangs, you're brainwashed, said Soto, now 37 and serving time for murder. Even if there's a threat on your own life, you're supposed to be this down homeboy. But then you do it all and they want to kill you anyway. So where's the love? There is none, former gang members say, and that's why S.N.Ys are growing. Gangs, they say, royal in conspiracy. Betrayal comes like breakfast, and that knife in your back might be your best friends. They just want to whack you for anything, said Albert Martinez, a former gang member from Matavilla neighborhood in East LA, who was now on Lancaster State Prison C Yard. It's not like it used to be. There's no old school values. Indeed, the rules of prison gangs have changed, said Lieutenant Bruce Frank, head of gang investigations at the prison. A lot of the newer guys don't have that level of respect that the older guys used to have, he says. Gangs used to have a more solid structure. Now it's almost a free-for-all. Part of the reason for disintegration, former members say, is Pelican Bay State Prison near the Oregon border, where many gang leaders from throughout the state are isolated in maximum security lockdowns. Without leadership, gang subordinates feud constantly. Gang leaders, meanwhile, are left to imagine all kinds of duplicity in their underlings and issue green lights, death warrants, like Detroit unemployment slips, former gang members and prison officials both say. There's nothing to do, so anything they suspect on someone, they run with it, Soto said. If there's nobody else to get, they focus on killing each other. Nuestra Familia has marked death for more than 1,000 people, many of them fellow Nuestra Familia members, says Devin Hawks, a prison gang expert at Pelican Bay. When the inmates hear their names on the list, Hawks said, they often will try to get to protective custody. All this has fostered politics, the name given to the gossip and backbiting that has made prison gang life resemble a high school popularity contest, except in this case, the participants have knives. Just surviving politics is exhausting, S.N.Y. inmates say. Wayne Bradley, a longtime member of the Rolling 30s Crips in South Los Angeles, said he was stabbed by youngsters in his own gang for refusing to hide their drugs and shanks. Planning against future attacks, Bradley had a nervous breakdown, he said. It's like a chess game with no rules. Plus, you got to watch the dudes the other guys got standing behind you. For some inmates, S.N.Ys are purgatories of regret. I'm doing time for guys who want to kill me, said Freddie Gonzalez, a Mexican mafia dropout from Pomona who was serving a life sentence for killing a Nuestra Familia member on mafia orders. Some of us older guys get together. We say, what did we do all this stuff for? I don't know. For others, though, S.N.Ys are a place to bury petty but lethal differences. The 40-year war between the Northern and Southern California Latino gang members is a case in point. Nuestra Familia, the prison gang comprised mostly of Northerners, is aligned with a lot of Black prison gangs. The Mexican mafia, controlling inmates mostly from Southern California, Latino street gangs, is linked with the White Aryan Brotherhood. These alliances have turned the prison yard into something resembling the Jim Crow South. Latino inmates from Southern California, for example, are forbidden from sharing anything with Blacks or Northern California Latinos, be it phones, water faucets, TVs, basketball courts, etc. So there would be no mistake. Nuestra Familia members distinguish themselves with tattoos such as the number 14 because the N is the 14th letter of the alphabet. Mafia members took 13 as their badge because M is the 13th letter. Before I came to prison, I'd heard about norteños and 14s, but I'd never seen a norteño, says Fuentes, who has a 13 tattooed on his chin. But when I saw one, it was just pure hatred, and I don't know why. He opted into S.N.Y. at 26 after a dispute with prison gang leaders. Even years later, when placed in a cell near Soto, a former Nuestra Familia member with the 14 tattooed on his wrist, Fuentes said he still felt uneasy. But now I see Emilio as Emilio, says Fuentes. I'm 31 now. It seems pretty childish in retrospect. I did a lot of stupid things for the homies on my chin, meaning the 13 symbol. Looking behind prison walls, the growth of S.N.Ys is a measure of the chaos on the streets of Southern California, says gang members and state officials. In the mid-1990s, the Mexican mafia behind bars extended its power to Southern California Latino gangs on the outside. The imprisoned mafia members ordered gang members to collect taxes from drug dealers operating on their turf or face death in prison. But because many mafia leaders are locked away, their control over street taxation has weakened. Greed, lack of control, and drug addiction breeds feuds, ripoffs, and betrayals on the street. Gang members use the drugs they're supposed to sell or rob mafia-protected dealers. Mafia members in Pelican Bay, some of them also drug addicts, bring wayward street soldiers into line for offenses real or imagined by issuing green lights. And such green lighting is driving new inmates to S.N.Ys at a good clip, inmates and prison officials both say. The S.N.Y. are so full because the Mexican mafia brothers are making them full, says Armando Ibarra, 32, a former street representative for the mafia, who opted for protective custody after mafiosos accused him falsely, he says, of stealing $87,000. They don't care no more about the guys that are working for them. Other inmates checked into S.N.Y. after following up mafia orders. In March, for example, 2 men were shot to death at a home in Mentone, a community near San Bernardino. Killings that prison gang investigators believe were mafia ordered. During the attack, an infant was shot in the foot, an unpardonable act to the Mexican mafia, says Leo Duarte, a California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's investigator. That guy should never have shot the guy holding a baby, Duarte said. The mafiosos who control the area was overheard on a recording. I can't give him a pass. He shot the baby. Those were his exact words on tape. When the man suspected of, though yet not charged with, the shooting returned to prison on a parole violation, he asked for protective custody. C Yard is akin to a gang member retirement home for Emilio Soto and Gerardo Fuentes. Fuentes misses the camaraderie of his former homeboys and the respect their numbers inspired amongst correctional officers. In S.N.Y., the cops will talk to you any which way they want. On the main line, they wouldn't do that because they could get hit by other gang members. Soto and Fuentes say that inmates on S.N.Y. inform easily on one another and never likes living near people with certain type of offenses. We know the worst. And guys who like other guys' equipment. Furthermore, they say S.N.Ys don't have enough jobs, vocational training, or self-help groups. Fewer than half of the 1,100 inmates on C Yard have jobs, according to inmates and prison officials. The rest are idle or locked in their cells much of the time. There's no rehabilitation in the state of California, Soto said, so you have to choose to rehab yourself. Still, both men expect gangs to push more inmates to sensitive needs yards. Soto says the Nuestra Familia leader who tried to kill him was himself stabbed by the gang soldiers a few years later. Soto had heard that he is in S.N.Y. at Pleasant Valley State Prison now. In the meantime, Northern and Southern have let down their guard, dropped the fixation on 13 and 14, and found a way to get along on a tier in California prisons. You start seeing things after doing so much time, says Fuentes, serving a life sentence since he was 21 for murder and robbery. After watching people fight for power and backstab one another, you say, this is all bullshit. The gang leaders are up in Pelican Bay. You're their pawn. This is their chessboard. But there it is there, man. That's from 2005. It's a long time ago. And they were already 9% of the population. They got to be over 50 by now.
Man, you know, it's interesting if you really look at it. You know, this whole article is about the creation of S.N.Y. in its early years. And what I'm seeing, right, and I started to analyze this, and I heard a video. The homie Hangout, the homie Josh Rascal did a video, man. Shouts out to him. Subscribe to his channel. He did one on the end of hostilities. And he brought up the S.N.Y. factor. That anytime you have 1,000 inmates and you put them on one yard, it doesn't matter if you denounce a gang, if you change or this and that, you're going to have conflicts. You're going to still have wars. You're going to still have organizations. You're still going to have gangs. And they created the S.N.Y. in hopes that they could deter violence, gangs, oppression, all the things that used to occur on the general population main lines, you know what I mean, that they blamed on the gangs' lifestyle. It carried on to the S.N.Y., and what happened is it blew up in their face. I've been told by a lot of people that it's crazier on S.N.Ys than it is on several general population yards.
So have I.
You know what I'm saying? You know, I've never been on no S.N.Y. I've never, as much as we get attacked in videos, look at these PCs, S.N.Y. I've never been S.N.Y. I've never been on a PC yard, so I don't know how they operate, man.
Yeah, neither have I.
But I've talked to several people that have, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, it's a culture shock, you know what I'm saying? And you learn, it's almost like you don't know who to trust when you're out there on these yards. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit different to where, you know, on a main line, the politics hold you a little bit more accountable, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Doesn't mean that you're always going to have the good end of the politics, you know what I mean? You know, but at the same time, there's usually some type of accountability, man. And whereas in S.N.Y., man, the creation, I don't think that they thought that this was all going to occur. You know what I'm saying? The interesting part that I seen in that is, in order to go S.N.Y., you have to inform law enforcement for the reasons why you need to be put in a sensitive knee yard. Why do you need a PCF? You know what I'm saying? So you can't just go in there and say, hey, I need to be S.N.Y, and they're just going to put you out there. You have to explain the reasons why behind it, man, which I kind of find a little bit interesting. I guess they're trying to hold nowadays, it's like they have S.N.Y on top of an S.N.Y. Okay, we can put these guys out here because they're dropouts or they're not active, but we can't put these guys out here with heinous crimes. They're starting to put even separation on that. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think all the people with those kind of crimes. Oh, and the reason I say guys that like the same equipment and I spell out certain things is because YouTube doesn't like you to say those things. So that's why, you know, if you're wondering, if I say men who like equipment, you guys know what that means. If I spell something out, you know what it means. But I just wanted to clarify that real quick. But I think all them people with them sort of crimes, they should have their own spot, bro. They shouldn't let them do that weird stuff to each other. You know what I mean? They could go dig for treasure in there all night long, bro. You know what I mean?
Chopped up, period, is what my personal opinion.
Well, they should put them on GP. You know what I mean? That's what I think. They shouldn't have places like that for them.
You know what I started thinking about, right? They used examples of people's cases, right? NF, MA, you know, Crips, Bloods, right? And I thought of that one particular group from down south, right? Whose big homies are known to be able to indulge. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They've been known to be on that needle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's nothing. I'm just wondering how many people got crossed up based upon one being Lias being sick, dope sick, pissed off for the day, and just decided to put someone's name on a list. I really honestly was thinking about that, man. Like, if the dope game is scandalous on the streets when you're a tecato, right? It is. I've dealt with tecatos in the past. They're corrupt, they're scandalous, they're convicts, they're deceitful, they're liars. Can you imagine someone that's part of an organizational leadership position, holding position that's a tecato, that's sick, that's running things? Yeah. Can you imagine how many people probably got the bad end of the political spectrum based upon that?
Happened. There's no doubt.
You know what I mean? Because the NF hierarchy, they're not supposed to indulge, period. I bet you there's a few that were, though.
Of
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, that we don't know about, that were swept under the rug, man. But I was really thinking about that because, you know, even when I've read other books or heard other interviews, I've heard stuff by Boxer Enriquez, you know what I mean? When in his debriefing and his story in his book, and he talks about being a straight tecato. You know what I'm saying? I'm just wondering, like, you know, the common theme I've always heard, right? And it's not to speak bad about any particular group, but it's that they're allowed to indulge. You know what I'm saying? And I've been around people who are sober-minded, who are there, they're sharp and everything, right? There comes a time, as far as being an addict, where your actions are not always going to be the best interest of anybody else but yourself. That's where the corruption, the selfishness, all starts to occur.
No doubt.
So I'm just wondering how many people, I mean, a lot of people who fall victim to prison politics, man, either it's drugs or personal conflict, bro.
That's the majority, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, to fall off as a northerner, man, it's usually going to be because of, you know, questionable overreaching of authority and too intensive discipline. But there's always going to be people with drugs. There's always going to be, man, it's so easy to fall off. It's way, I promise you, it's 1,000 times easier to fall off than it is to stay on.
Bro, before the S.N.Y, bro, those main lines, before the validation, man, half the fucking here, excuse my language, half the NR members were getting high, bro, out there in the main lines. Those are facts. You know what I'm saying? And they were trying to sweep it under the rugs because if they knew that if it was found out, they'd either get demoted their status or they'd get hit, man. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So drugs have always been a, think about it, you go to an S.N.Y, you're no longer politically obligated. You know what I'm saying? You no longer have this bylaw structure that you have to maintain. You can do as you want out there.
Right.
But now they've created these groups that are still, it's funny because now you have groups that are being created on these S.N.Ys that are trying to enforce the same type of politics and law structure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then they're just trying to manipulate it in a different way. I don't know. Sometimes it kind of makes me like question it, man. Like, you know, I'm fortunate. I've never been that route. I'm not going back to prison. I haven't been back to any of those environments for years, man. And I'm not going to, man. But I think CDC dropped the ball on this, and now they're trying to reintegrate everybody. They're trying to throw out S.N.Ys with general population. They're trying to do away with it. I've heard rumors that no level 1 or level 2 yards are considered active anymore. So imagine a youngster who's going in there on a 2-year sentence, who's thrown on a level 1, level 2 yard. And nowadays, when you go to those yards, you're not coming with these anymore. You know what I'm saying? You're going to have to come with one of those. And they're reintegrating level 3 yards. You know what I'm saying? And even in some facilities, right, though, from my understanding, is you'll have these level 4 yards where half the block is GP and half of it's S.N.Y, but they let the S.N.Y come out together and they let the GPs come out together. Eventually, those doors are going to pop at the wrong place. You know what I mean? Or someone's going to get put in the wrong block, rotunda, and get caught slipping, man. So I don't know what CDC is doing. I mean, I really honestly think, man, I think this reintegration is a tactic to try to throw people back in the shoes. Either you're going to coexist or we're going to lock you back up in the shoes. I really think that's the excuse and reason behind it, bro.
I agree. I mean, now you got all these little S.N.Y gangs and they're causing disturbances and stuff and trying to basically play politics like a GP yard, not to the same extent, because they could use drugs, they can have girlfriends, what I'm saying? They can do whatever they want, bro, so it's a little different, but it's still political. You know what I mean?
But look at that. They have more
They're going to get tired of that too.
They have more groups in the S.N.Y yard than they do in the GP yards nowadays. They got so many splinter groups. They got like, what is it? Nuestra Cosa, Zapatistas, or what do you mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? 2-5ers, man, new Flowers, Capital. I mean, and all kinds of little sub-faction groups, man. Like, and that's not even to go into all the white S.N.Y crews that just established, man. You have the what is it? The Brand Busters and all kinds of stuff, man. I mean, all these little factions, even the GBG, they're active out there in the S.N.Y, man. There's more groups in these S.N.Y yards, man, that it's hard to follow what's going on from prison to prison.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And I can't even imagine. I'd rather just stay in the hole.
I mean, what do you think the percentage that's S.N.Y and GP nowadays?
I'm gonna go with okay. As far as active yards, I'm going to go with all the ones that are approved by homies that they can go to. Then you got the GP yards that supposedly are all bad for homies, but they're not PCs. They just don't know no better. I would say those are about 35%, and straight up no good yards are probably 65.
Wow.
That would be my guess based on what I've heard.
Yes,
it might be closer to 50-50. I could be wrong, but I think there's more S.N.Ys than GPs though.
Yeah, I think High Desert, New Folsom, Solano, Salinas Valley. Pleasant Valley too. I even heard CMC East is active again too, believe it or not. One of the yards, you know what I
mean? Yeah. Every year S.N.Y is going to gain more people though.
Oh, without a doubt, man.
Because the people of this generation, that are starting to come to prison, like we went in the early 90s, the people that are coming now, they're different.
Well, remember what they used to call it in the 90s, right? In San Quentin, they wore regular blues like the mainliners, and they called them special program. Do you remember that?
They're special, all right. No, I don't remember that.
They called them special program, bro. Like, and everywhere they went, they called escort. And they'd have, they would only be like 5 or 6 of them. And they'd have about 8 guards around them. And they only had one tier that was in Carson section back then. Right? I come back in, I want to say, I want to say 2003, 2004. I don't know. No, 2003 it was. All Alpine was all S.N.Y now. The whole unit. All 5 tiers.
I was in Quentin for like 3 weeks one time on a layover back in like 08. Because I was in the hole in Tracy. I went out to court in Contra Costa. And then for some reason they shot me to Quentin for like 3 weeks, and then they shot me back to Tracy. But yeah, Alpine was all bad. You know what I mean?
With overflow in Donner section. I was tripping off that. I was like, wow, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just I don't think CDC knew what they created here. I think that they thought they were going to be able to manage, have less violence, less issues, less drugs, but all they did was create an atmosphere for a free for all.
Yeah, I don't know what's better from a correctional standpoint. You're probably not going to have as many killings, but you're going to have just as much violence, if not more, like one-on-one type of things. I don't know. It's hard to say. When it's a one-on-one type of thing, though, you don't really necessarily got to lock down an entire institution and have all kinds of modified programs. So S.N.Y is probably better from a correctional standpoint.
But now from a mainline standpoint, man, it's almost like you got people who are interacting more with cops than it was years ago before.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really done no time in a long time, and I'm glad because I wouldn't even know where to begin nowadays with that weird shit they got going on. Well, all right, man. I guess that does it, man. But yeah, that talks about the damn when S.N.Y was just starting to get rolling, 9% of the prison population. We got to be at least 50-50 now, and it's only going to get more. And it's a different era, folks. But any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section, man. And enjoy the rest of your Friday. Your boy Ro, Big Homie Flacco, and we're out.